This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Professor Judyth Sachs, former PVC Learning and Teaching at the University of Sydney, Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost at Macquarie University, and Special Advisor in Higher Education at KPMG, and now Chief Academic Officer at Studiosity. Welcome.
It gives me great pleasure to talk to Professor Chris Moran, the Vice-Chancellor and President of University of New England. Look, I'm not going to introduce you. I'd like you to introduce yourself, in particular through the object that you have brought that represents your journey as a leader and a learner. So, as they say on the ABC, over to you.
Thank you, Judith. Very nice to talk to you today. Originally, I started my career as a soil scientist, but what I've got is a couple of objects that are germane, and they're all blocks in soil. They all come from the year which I did my PhD, where I was looking at structure of soil and the relationship between soil and agronomic activities of ploughing and plant root growth. So quite a fundamental area. And another one here from Western Australia, which is remarkably beautiful.
Yeah.
What really these were about was trying to understand the basic architecture of the system that comes from its material properties, and then relate that to the overall behaviour of the system. So I thought it was quite an interesting metaphor for something like a university where there's all these autonomous pieces, but they somehow come together and then emerges from this an entity with an identity and a history and a future. And I think it also validates the kind of scientific worldview that it is worth looking at the detail of things. Some people say too reductionist, but it's very important to go down and understand those things, but also to comprehend the systems of things from the top and what emerges out of them as well. You can't necessarily add up all the pieces to get what comes out of the top. So you've got to take these two views. And I think my leadership and learning journey has very much been a not a dichotomy, but a kind of bouncing between these two worlds all the time, working with individuals and trying to enable individuals and enable myself as an individual, but also looking at how institutional strategy, for example, is something that's got to be seen as emergent in the sets of systems that we work in at the moment around us. It's a very both complicated and complex external environment. So I think that metaphor works pretty well. And interestingly, the way roots and soil structure and nutrients are arranged is in some sense analogous to the way we organise around courses or research projects or social networks of people in our universities and in our universities communities. I don't want to stretch the metaphor too far.
Well, I mean, the metaphor that I was taking from that, there's beauty in the simplicity and the complexity. So it's both complex and simple. And in that sort of exchange, there's beauty. And so, learning can be seen as beautiful, particularly when you see the results of student learning and how they, through the interventions of those of us in universities, we can see lives transform.
It's very much at that individual level as well as academics and researchers. We tend to work with individuals in small groups, sometimes in larger teams, but the truth of individual data acquisition or thinking is often at the level of individuals. But then again, to draw back and particularly with the University of New England, it's been a real eye-opener as to how different an institution can be. I spent a lot of time at CSIRO and then University of Queensland and then Curtin University, and they're all very different institutions. But UNE is different, fundamentally different way, and that is that the university was established to provide access for education for everybody. And the founders of the university, way back in the early part of the century, the people who wanted to create a university here, they wanted access, inclusion before we had the terminology of policies and procedures they knew it intuitively. They knew that people in regional areas needed to be approached in quite a different way. They were courageous. They sought no permission. I don't want to say heresy, but they probably didn't have an Australian Tertiary Education Commission to help them out. They just got on with it. They did radical things. They went out into the community and they taught a group of humans that nobody believed had anything to do with university. This group of humans were called adults. And I think at the time that the children of elite families at university, adults were considered to have either grown up and done it or didn't need it because they didn't get it or whatever the logic was. But the people who founded this university did not think that. And so the emergence of a university 70 years later, we're in our 70th anniversary year this year, it is a university where accessibility, inclusion, and all of the features of culture of the university to help people who are given access achieve it in the future and come back as tidal waves of stories of changed lives. Mm. And it's just remarkable. We've been going through event after event this year and reconnecting with the alumni and the consistency of storytelling from so many people. Only the University of New England will provide me with an opportunity. And now I'm this person, not only in the role that I play and the money that I've got, but the way I view myself as a person. There's story after story after story. It's fantastic.
And in particular, I mean, I have an older brother who was a principal in a high school in Queensland. And Peter is a graduate, you know, one of his master's degree is from UNE. And so it's, you know, the connection between people who have some sort of relationship with somebody, either as family or friend with UNE, is very, you know, it's 6 degrees of separation at least.
Oh, it's even less. When I was in Perth and it was announced that I was coming here to be the Vice-Chancellor, I was stunned how many people came squiggling out of the woodwork with degrees or brothers and sisters or mothers and fathers and uncles and aunts with UNE degrees, and quite a few people who were working in the university had been academics at UNE who came to inform me about the greatness of the university that they'd been a part of. And I was stunned. And then the second thing that happened, I don't want to accidentally do advertising here, but LinkedIn's an interesting app. And so when I changed the institution that I was working with, it led me to a list that it created of all of the people who I was linked to in LinkedIn who had a UNE connection. And it was a lot. I was very surprised how many people I knew who had a link.
What was your experience like as an undergraduate and then as a postgraduate in the same university, Sydney University?
Yeah, I think I was very young. As an undergraduate, I think I had sort of 3 experiences really. So I supported myself financially and lived out of home. I didn't live on campus. So part of my experience was working at night. I worked pretty much every night, stacking the shelves in supermarkets and emptying trucks for others to stack shelves. So that possibly meant that some of my days were a little hazy, caffeine-fueled, hazy days. But what I did, which is quite counter to what's going on today, I was quite obsessive about going to lectures and hearing firsthand from the lecturers and writing my own notes. And I think in truth, that's where I learned. So I do have a bit of a challenge in today's environment of that learning change that's occurring with online presentation of information, and students are learning in quite different ways. I know that if I had been left on my own to learn with video at the University of Sydney, I wouldn't be here today. I just wouldn't have managed to have the discipline to do it. But the discipline of going to lectures and being with other people is incredibly important. And then the social dimension that kind of fits in between that of enjoying being young, out of home, and kind of making your own decisions. I did do my PhD at the University of Sydney, but the truth is I didn't do it in the University of Sydney. I was a bit of an accidental trailblazer there. I did my final practical work in my agriculture degree. We had to do prac work on farms and in relevant businesses throughout. And I ended up in my honours year becoming quite entranced by research. So I did my final time of practical experience in the CSIRO in Canberra. but that was my only college experience. Actually, I lived in college while I did that, but there were no other students around because it was over vacation. So I ended up actually in Brisbane because I found a supervisor who was going to work on cell structure, as I mentioned earlier, and he was in Brisbane. So I actually commuted between Sydney and Brisbane to do my PhD. So I did my PhD in the labs, the CSIRO labs in Brisbane, and then commuted back to Sydney. They required me there for one semester every year for doing tuning. I don't know what, it was just an expectation of the university in those days. You couldn't possibly do a PhD if you weren't there for a third of the year. You get some external perspective on the university by doing it from within the CSIRO. But I did miss out on what I later really enjoyed participating in from afar, which is the interaction between PhD students as a cohort. I missed out on that because I was more or less on my own in CSIRO as a student.
So when you think of the students and your recent experience at Curtin that has very, very good student experience as expressed by the quilt, UQ, many group of 8s don't do very well in terms of quilt, and now a very different cohort of students. What do you think student life is like compared to your life as both an undergraduate and a postgraduate student?
The main thing for students today is a little term that we don't know if we've invented, but we use it a lot here. We call it lifeload as opposed to study load or workload. And so many of our students have a very heavy lifeload. The majority of our students are mature age, so they're not school leavers. So they're working often full-time, managing families, small children, careers, and trying to change careers often by their study. So in that sense, university is a part of a full life rather than the dominant feature in their lives at the time. So I think that's quite different. It probably parallels a little bit of my own experience of working at night. But I was still a traditional undergraduate in the sense that I went to university each day and did my practice and lectures, as I said, because the information and access wasn't available by other means. Our on-campus students here are changing somewhat as well. Many of them work, so many of our on-campus students are still carrying a partial load rather than full load, so they take a bit longer to complete their degree. And with the flexible learning that we have now, we're noticing a little bit more mix and match, if you like, where students are saying, well, I'll go out on farm, for example, and I'll earn money and I'll still continue my degree in part as I do that. So much more mixing of life and learning. And I think one of the other things to touch on a slightly tricky subject, the extent of challenges in society and in our student body and mental wellness, that's not something that was prevalent, or maybe it was prevalent, but it wasn't present. Memory as being an undergraduate. You may have had as much, I really can't say in retrospect, but it's a very important part of being a leader in the university today to try to figure out how the learning experience either fits into or at least doesn't exacerbate the challenges that people are having when they're coming from school or from the working environment with their wellness. And it's so prevalent that it can't be seen as sort of an illness. It's actually part of the lives and part of the ecosystem and community of who we are now. And so I'm very sympathetic to ideas and constructs that ease the burden, because I think it's fair to assume that burden is quite widespread, different individuals at different times. And I'm just starting to hatch a little bit of a thought process here as to whether we might see a next phase of the development of the leaders of our university through our colleges to begin to have a conversation with the young people in our colleges about what their role might be with one another in this regard. Is there a university can help individuals support one another throughout their degrees and create a living environment here that begins to think about that wellness issue? Because I think people will carry this throughout their adult life. So I don't think it's something that will come and go. I think this is part of the way we recognize humanity now. That sounds a bit pessimistic, but I think it might be realistic.
No, I think you're right. That sense of well-being, and it's student well-being, we see it a lot. We're also seeing it more and more amongst our academic colleagues. it's hidden a bit, but I think we're seeing that as well. But you know, we're seeing it very much in the community, and that sort of the psychiatric community and other sort of well-being communities are just saying simple things like asking somebody, "Are you okay?" And that sense of isolation can often happen to our students. And it becomes everybody's responsibility, not just the responsibility of the health system. So what's your approach to that, looking after, I guess, the mental health ecosystem in the environment where you have a duty of care?
Seems to me to be a huge issue for society that for some reason we have a bottleneck in the populating our communities with far more practitioners. And that if we had quadruple, say, the number of practitioners in our communities, then accessibility would change, the cost would go down, a whole lot of change would occur. I think that would be very beneficial. So we, as all universities, providing both employee and student support services. Like all universities, we're struggling to keep those services up to the level of intensity that to keep up with the rate of demand. We certainly had that same challenge both at UQ and at Reading when I was there, is just how much resources the university can put in. It's very interesting and important that the workplace health and safety obligations make it very clear that we have responsibility for both staff and students in our university in a formal sense as well as in a moral sense, if you like. And I think they can work well. I think they can work well together. I'm sure we're trained and that we're aware of both the responsibilities and pragmatic ways of helping people. I suspect as a sector, we're getting a little better at what you might call early intervention, so sensible discussions around issues that arise early rather than waiting for everything to bubble up into a formality of complaint or a formality of concern that someone might express for themselves or someone else. And I think that us learning to do that, I think, is important. It's challenging, but I think it's very important. We've had in the University of New England has been through quite some tumult over the last decade. So we have a very significant program, what might be described as healing within the university at the moment. So it's very important when I came here as Vice-Chancellor to look carefully, to listen carefully, and then to acknowledge the pain that people had felt and that people were still going through, and the challenges that come for people of engaging with new leadership and bright new ideas that you might think you've got without proper acknowledgement of what people have been through, and then programs that help individuals find their journey forward. Often it comes with a very high level of fatigue, and as you know, the sector right across our sector is quite fatigued because of the long-term decline in resourcing of the higher education sector, and really quite a big shift across our sector from resourcing of teaching to resourcing of research, and then the additional income from international students to fuel that. And so the growth of higher education globally, the growth of Australia within global higher education has just been phenomenal over the last 2 decades. No one could have imagined that we would have grown to the strength that we have against the competition that we have globally. But part of the cost of that has been the fatigue and demands on academic staff. And we've had successive governments of all kinds who have really just, I think, gradually not been able to face the scale of changing long-term budgets that's required to really support the higher education sector. Now I'm a Vice-Chancellor of the university, so I clearly have a view that if society resources its higher education properly, then the whole of society benefits forever. And I think we see really intelligent countries doing this well, but we see a lot of very wealthy countries not doing it all that well. And we probably fall a little bit of the middle there.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking that this is an inflection point. And just in the past year that you've been Vice-Chancellor, there's been major policy changes. There's been the Accord document and the recommendations there. God knows what will happen to those. But more importantly, there's been the rise of technology that really begins to question what we teach, how we teach, and the moral compass of both people working in universities, but also people who deliver technology. ChatGPT this time last year, it was Chicken Little, the world was falling in. This year, people are thinking, all right, how do we work with it? But at the core of all of this has to be a commitment to academic integrity and quality and standards. So can you just give me a sense of where you fit in terms of your own personal North Star as it relates to this, but then how you translate that into your leadership within a university that was really established to be a distance education university, online university, and now progressing to a different kind of university.
If we go back to perhaps my reflection on being a student attending lectures, I think one of the things about that was incredibly important for me as an individual was writing. So I needed to transcribe what I was hearing from lecturers into writing, and that was the learning process. So I come from that perspective where I still take quite a lot of notes sitting in meetings. I rarely look at them, but the act of doing that is an incredibly important part of memory and learning and decision making. I think the move away from that to an environment that is essentially visual and oral is quite a challenge for leaders of my age, because there's a transformation that's occurred that's been gradual in the generations that came after us, who are able to learn in far more mixed methods, I might say. And some of them are saying that children of today will perhaps never even use pens and pencils for writing, and that's, for me, quite a stunning proposition of reliance on various forms of technology. And the latest one, actually, I have quite young children, as well as two older and two younger children, and they're now saying that the children are rejecting typing. They're rejecting to learn to type at school. They're saying we don't understand why this is a thing we need to do. The way you interact with the devices, with your finger or with your voice, we don't understand why this complicated thing that you're asking us to learn here is relevant. Because they don't sit down at computers and type, they hold them in their hand and talk to them and use their fingers. So I think that's an important part of the question of future learning, and really important in thinking through planning for the future and where artificial intelligence sits, is if we plan the future from the paradigm of our own learning, we'll miss the learners of the future. That said, I have a university that has many of its students who are adult already, who learn to read and write with pens and pencils and books. And so we're in a mixed zone from that perspective. So I think we will for some time need to provide multiple sources of pathways of learning for people, with media of learning right from the highest of technology to still allowing people to work face to face. On the role of artificial intelligence, I'm incredibly excited. I've been working with neural networks and artificial intelligence for several decades. I started working in the late 90s with neural networks. I was part of a wave of people that tried to make them work and didn't, and ended up using machine learning and other techniques at the time. So I've been following and watching, and I was surprised that people were surprised, if you like. But to me, ultimately, this way of fitting data was going to succeed. People were continuing to develop nuances and methods, and then the mass data and structuring of data that's led to the large language models and this new revolution appeared at once. And I wrote some emails in November of the year that ChatGPT 3.5 was released. And as soon as I saw it, I wrote messages to friends and colleagues and said, the world has just changed. We've now mobilized into the point where these models are going to be more usable and more ubiquitous. So I'm very keen on using them. I don't believe they're sentient. Now, I say that because my ultimate view of their use now is to enslave them. So I think that you don't enslave something. I don't think you should enslave something you think is sentient. So I don't believe they're intelligent in that sense at the moment. If that sort of intelligence appears, then I would change my view. But right now we're seeing absolutely the end of regurgitation learning. We have really used regurgitation learning as the major mechanism of learning for a very, very long time. It's finished.
Yep.
So we now need to adjust for how people might learn without the regurgitation. Now, there's a real challenge in there because many of us would believe that human brains learn a little bit like neural networks. And so repetition is actually quite the important thing, and exposure to similarity for laying down neural pathways is quite important. So the idea of a single exposure to a chat GPT response to something will lead to a learned experience in the human brain is quite a concern that I don't think we've quite come to terms with yet. If that could be replaced by a creativity, collaboration, planning frame as the basis of the way humans operate cognitively in the future, with the view that we will always have something like large language models or their successors, which will be better and stronger. If you make that assumption, then it's probably safe to think that the human brain can move to a different operational domain with constant access to the artificial intelligence. And for those learners and those parts of learning that we think would fit there, then it's entirely appropriate that we redesign the pedagogy of those experiences so that the slaves are appropriately the regurgitation engines, and that what I call the design pedagogy that will be needed will be much more about the journey of learning, the interactions of learning, and the outcomes of learning, and creativity that can come into learning. And there's something that we've been doing for a very long time that we can mobilize into that space. And I've been very convinced about this for a long time. And that is that we've separated research, the discovery process, from teaching the regurgitation process. Not everybody has. There are very good academics who don't do that. They're very good students who indicate that learning in an integrated manner is workable, and quite a few universities who have particular degrees that join this up. So I'm not suggesting any grand revolution. But what I am saying is that the sense of discovery that those of us who took a research pathway feel and know, I think is a ubiquitous human trait. I think people enjoy that sense of discovery, the sense of being the first, the realization that something is different than it was the nanosecond before that realization occurred. So now the question is how artificial intelligence becomes the participant in the human discovery in a learning journey process. Now, we've got good models for this. We have good models in society, and we've had them for a long time through things like online computer gaming, for example, that are constructed very much in this way. But they're not necessarily constructed with the concept of leaving life and career skills behind as a result of the experience. They are much more to do with instant gratification and the continued obsession and involvement, the attention world that we well know about. Now, there is no approach, the answer to your question that way, without touching on integrity. My view is that if we move to that method, and we're much more interested in the way the humans progress through the journey, any creativity that comes from it, the effectiveness of their access to the information through the AI, how quickly they realize either as a team or as individuals what information they need, the quality of their ability to access that information, and their ability to mobilize that information. So you have essentially, in that mechanism, completely bypassed the step of regurgitation checking. There's another very nice piece of work that's been done by the Khan Academy, who had access to Chat GPT-4 well before anyone else. OpenAI invited them in before the release of Chat GPT 3.5. And so they've been building, they realized very quickly what was happening. They got teams of people involved, and they have built very sophisticated tutors. So you have something else here, which is very interesting, which is the AI as the tutor informs the human pedagogue as to what's happening with the students, where they're strong, where they're weak, how much interaction is going on with the tutor, how much the tutor's doing, and how much the student is doing. All that information can be fed in quite a well-packaged and intelligent way to the human. In fact, you can even have multiple levels. So you can have the first level of that information essentially flowing out as data, going to another educated AI, which is then packaging that for the academics in the way they need them, either for direct intervention with individual students or as the means of ultimately assessing the outcome. And a great example that he put in his book was the ability to ask the AI tutor, I've received this essay, so I'm still thinking of people writing essays. I've received this essay from student X. Can you give me the indicators and description of your involvement and collaboration with student X on doing this? And the tutor can describe that. And at one end of the spectrum is a tutor saying, I had nothing to do with it. In other words, the student has pushed the question in to chat GPT-4, produced an answer and sent it to the academic for correction. It's a fail. It's a fail. The other thing that they have noticed is that with collaboration, so they encourage the students to collaborate with the AI to produce the written work. And what they've done is raise the pass limits. So now the expectation of the quality of what you will produce will be much higher than it previously was. And he makes an interesting point that I guess I hadn't thought through until I read him writing it to me, as it were, was that we actually have a privilege issue that we don't often deal with, which is some people have a proclivity for writing. And then that proclivity for writing and the privilege, obviously, of getting certain skills that leads you to be a good writer, then leads you into being a successful learner of many other things. And those of you that don't have the privilege or the proclivity for writing are always seen as kind of not as good. They don't perform as well. And so the AI equalizes this field, as long, again, as it's done with open eyes and the tutors are properly trained and the information flow through to the pedagogues is appropriately constructed. And then he sees this as a huge leveler of privilege and advantage. I think it's partially on the basis of direct learning, but it's also on the basis, as I said before, of the assumption that the tools will be available in the workplace. So when people graduate and they move into the workplace is going to increasingly have an expectation that people can use the tools to be efficient and produce high quality. I guess one of the real concerns is where the human goes out of the loop and the AI is producing information for itself. A lot of people raise that as a concern. And I think you'd have to say that the institution that is not putting the scaffolding in to avoid that is being very sloppy. So that's where the quality of the institutional response becomes really important.
So what I'm hearing you say, and I agree with you, it means a change in pedagogy. It requires a change in design, but in particular, it requires a change in assessment. You're no longer assessing your ability to regurgitate. You're actually assessing the ability to understand and apply. And for students to get the most out of that, it's the quality of the feedback they receive. In many respects, and what I'm hearing you say, learning is actually at the center, and then how you measure the quality of that learning requires different kinds of assessment.
Yes, very much so. And we know that even today, and actually for some time now, there's been a narrative from industry that you produce as graduates who know a lot about stuff that we don't do. And they don't know how to work together. They don't know how to formulate a plan. They don't know these other so-called soft skills. We also know that groups of people working with the AI can discern the individual's inputs. And so something that's been a vexed issue for group learning in university environment for so many years starts to become more transparent, because we know that we get in any given group of students that some students will put in significant amount of effort, and then something of distribution curve in the middle of those who kind of participate, and then there's the free riders. And finding those free riders and then discerning and differentiating scoring and assessment for those has always been something of a challenge. Well, that challenge changes quite dramatically when the AI tutor is able to get the direct input and involvement of each student. And interestingly, the AI tutors can actually be sitting in the room with the students talking to one another. So it doesn't necessarily have to be through a text interface that this is done. That the voice recognition, facial recognition, a whole lot of these technologies now start to converge into very different learning environments than we've had before, I think.
So what I'm also hearing you say is, in this new environment, there are multiple opportunities.
Absolutely.
Can you just expand what some of those other opportunities might be?
I think virtualization of real environments, digital twins, the next level of digital twins, I think is going to be incredibly important. And part of the interesting part of this conversation is that I would view that universities can play something of a different role than we generally play in terms of how our economies and industries evolve. So one stance you could take is to say, I'll try to predict where the employers are going to be. The old thing about the ice hockey player, they go where the puck is, go where the puck's going to be. Problem with that, with digitization and the digital journeys of employers, is that they don't quite know how fast they're moving and in which directions they're prepared to go, because it's very hard for most companies at the moment to see the relationship between technology and profitability. You see the relationship between technology and a whole bunch of potential symptoms of profitability, getting profitability. It's quite the challenge in a broad sense, obviously not in the sense of new companies that start off with technology and then build themselves into the future, the Amazons of the world. And so I have a view that it's worth considering working with the employers and the students together with the technologies and designing pedagogy. So we talked a little bit there about design pedagogy in the sense of the journey of involvement with AI. I think there's also a design pedagogy that describes the journey through what we might call a degree. Goodness knows what it might be called in the future. But that gradual acquisition of skills and the gradual acquisition of the ability to learn, and then, as you said before, to apply learning into a situation, it seems to me we should be able to design that with the employers, where the employers see the opportunities for their businesses, both through the people that will come to them and the skills they have, but also the exposure to the technologies that might give them that profitability. So you can imagine now a degree journey that moves from the beginning, where you get an introduction, if you like, to the sets of tools that you're going to use as you're beginning learning the basic tool sets and principles and the basics of the disciplines that apply into the area that you're moving. You then may move into a heavily immersed environment from the point of view of the technologies and the learning journey, AI, etc., that we've just talked about. And that may move you in towards the end of your journey into actual digitized environments and in the real world that you've been working with virtually. So that provides the opportunity to begin to work with those enterprises to start to move their technology and their technology utilization forward, so that journey then also begins to build the demand for the students that you'd be producing.
So just to finish, you've gone through, like I imagine at the moment, it's graduation season, half-year graduation season. What advice do you think you can give to the next generation of citizens, but also of the next generation of productive workers or your graduates?
I think it's hard to get out of cliches in answering your question, Judith, but given the conversation we've had, one or two of the things that we need to grasp and hold on to, because I've just given some quite high level thoughts there about artificial intelligence, but the truth is none of us really know what kind of trajectory we're on. So it seems to me dominantly you want to maintain curiosity and openness. The idea that as a graduate you've kind of finished something is a big concern to me. That was very much the mode when I went through as an undergraduate. I finished, now I can go to work. I think we need to keep people both curious and open, so that their experiences of how to learn don't go away, and that they can dip into learning if they need to. So if an employer or life is pushing them for the need, or they want to because of that curiosity and the change in the world around them. So I think there's a significant cultural shift for us as a community to not think you go to university and then it's done. I think that's really key. Now, that's cliched around lifelong learning, but the question is what's sitting underneath that? What do you hang on to as an individual who's going through that graduation process? And I'd say openness and curiosity are the two things that will hold you in good stead. And then the third thing is to look for what can't be AI'd and continue to build what can't be AI'd. And we know it's going to be very difficult to build human-human contact with AI. It'll support, it'll transform, but we still know, maybe it's because we're old. Sorry,
Sure.
maybe it's because I'm old. But I'm still sitting in many circumstances in rooms with people. There's still a bit of a residual of the COVID where people say it's so nice to be together. We had 3 nights of alumni events. It's our 70th birthday this year. We had 3 nights of alumni events this week in 3 cities. And in every occasion, people were saying it's so nice to be back together, and it's nice to see other people from the university. It's good to see the people from the university be here and talk. So until that changes, it seems to me humans hanging on to what can't be AI'd, and that is our connections with one another. So curiosity and openness around that learning and technology, and then what can't be AI'd, hold on to some of that.
And what a positive way to end our conversation. Chris, I've really enjoyed our conversation, and particularly some of your thoughts around AI and the opportunities and challenges that it offers. And congratulations on the 70th anniversary of UNE. It is a remarkable university. So keep enjoying it and keep letting it thrive.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.